Happer with 1620 The Zone, celebrating 25 years, this time with our own John Bishop and Josh Peterson, hosts of Unsportsmanlike Conduct since 2014. Gentlemen, thank you for doing this. You were a part of 1620 The Zone's history. You guys took over as the host of the show in 2014. What did it look like in the days and months leading to that? Because it's been largely unchanged since then, with the exception of a producer change.
I started in 2012, the football season of 2012. Josh was producing and Michael was still on the show. It was an interesting first couple of years because after Michael left, I spent quite a while just working with a lot of different people. Thankfully, Matt Verzal really was like the main fill-in. He did the lion's share of those shows. I spent some time with Jay Foreman. There were some other folks that came in. We were kind of dragging our feet a little bit on, how we wanted to do this and who we wanted to come in. And initially, I had suggested that we bring Jack Mitchell over because I had worked with him. I had just worked with him at KLIN for several years. And I thought, well, heck, we could do a great show together. There were some things going on behind the scenes that, probably weren't going to allow that to happen. And I remember one day pulling Josh aside and saying, listen, I just want to be honest with you, because I knew that he was interested. I mean, I'd like to do the show with Jack just because our chemistry together, and we've worked together for a long time, and I think we do a really good show. But just want you to know you're like second on my list.
I mean, John's not wrong. Like, I obviously wanted the job. My whole radio career, I thought, was leading to me being on the air somewhere. And so I had a meeting with our general manager at the time, and I told him, like, look, I really would like this job. I know that I'm inexperienced, but I think John and I have good chemistry, and I think that we would do a really good show. That was probably March or April. I mean, that was pretty early. And at a certain point in time, I think it was like right after the College World Series, Neil Nelkin, he said, like, hey, why don't we start having you do these shows to see what it would sound like? So I started doing the show on a daily basis with John in either end of June or early July. I had a meeting with Neil and with my boss, Andy, at the very beginning of August or the end of July. In hindsight now, I am so blown away that, like, it unfolded that way. That was 10 years ago. I was 25, 26 years old. And I've said this to John publicly, and I've said it to other people privately. The fact that he was willing to put up with a guy in his mid-20s as his co-host, I think, speaks so highly of John. I think that had to be a very, very, very difficult time for him. But that is our origin story of starting on the air together.
I never had a hesitation working with Josh. I never did. I was always impressed with how engaged he was and how opinionated he was. And I think part of not having, a hesitation to work with someone younger. I was once Josh. Honestly, I never even thought about Josh's age as being an issue. It was just more of am I going to be able to work with this person? And then when Stibbs came along, there was something that worked, and it worked right away. And we identified, I think, pretty early, even through some tough spells in terms of whether or not the audience would accept us. We've got a different dynamic here that's never really been explored on the radio station before, and that is we've got different generations now. We've got different perspectives. There's always going to be it was always better back in the day. We couldn't continue to do their show because we're not them. But I think we were able to identify pretty early that this difference in generations, this difference in, experiences can be a real benefit, similar to how, Kevin and Michael's experiences were very different from each other, even though they're basically the same age. That was critical. I think this way gave us a chance to explore places that, in a sports talk sense, not many places had tried. Obviously, it's still working for now.
Longevity is such a big thing, and continuity is such a big thing. You guys are now the longest running iteration of that show, like, right? I mean, that's a testament to you guys working well together, being so affable to each other. How important is just the day-to-day, knowing what to expect sort of from each other? And now that's been 10 years running.
I think it's super important from a couple of different perspectives. I don't think John and I probably surprise each other anymore with opinions, maybe occasionally. The magic of surprise, I guess, is gone. But what you lose in that, you gain in just I know how he operates. I know how the show operates. We very rarely sit there and plan out, let's do this in this segment. Let's do this in this segment. Let's do this in this segment. We are both prepping in our own ways. And then we come together and the show unfolds as it unfolds, which I think is a great testament to us. Also, I like working with John.
I think a lot of times you watch a lot of the chit chat shows on TV and, it's all very meticulously planned out and they got the whole list of topics and all that other stuff where everyone thinks they need to be an expert on everything. I think the thing that's fun with us is we don't have to be an expert on everything. People just kind of naturally assume in our business, and Connor, I'm sure you get this too, where it's like, you don't talk enough about hockey or you don't talk enough about figure skating or whatever the case may be. And it's like, well, we can't be experts on everything, but we can have takes on everything. I'm kind of getting off on a tangent here, but I can remember we basically had at least 3, probably 4 guests a show every day.
Yeah.
Every day. At some point, it just got to the point of, do we really need this many guests? Sure, we have our regulars. We all have our regulars, the people we really like to talk to. Ultimately, the show is about us. And I hope, and I trust that people are listening to Unsportsmanlike Conduct because they want to hear what Josh and I have to say.
Dave Tepper, I think he pushed that on us.
We can't go much longer without talking about how important Dave was. There were some moments early on where it didn't seem like the audience was resonating, and he gave us some great advice, and he really worked with us, and things turned around in a pretty quick time frame. We can't say enough great things about Dave. Dave was a tremendous boss. You talk about, people who replace folks. To replace a Neil Nelkin is impossible. And Dave was the perfect person. He came in at just the right time for a lot of reasons, not just for us, but for the station as a whole, and really kind of ushered us into a different era, which I think the effects of that are still happening today.
We have some really good examples on the Zone right now, and there's been a lot of iterations of it in the past of like arranged marriages almost. Your guys' show was, maybe sort of trend breaking in that way. And I think maybe it had to be sort of proven that, all right, well, we could just put a couple guys together and people listen to their sports takes, and then it becomes sort of a community rather than, sort of what the fan base of the show becomes when it's the other iteration of it. Do you sort of understand what I'm getting at there?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I like the fact, and listen, I'm not against, former athletes being on the air, but ultimately it's got to be about personality and people who know the medium, because it can get really painful if you're just bringing in someone because they have a big name and they're not great communicators, or they just don't understand the flow of a radio show or whatever the medium is, podcast, television, doesn't matter. I want to believe, because we talk, Josh and I, we all do, I'm sure, talk to a lot of young people who are looking to get into the business. And it's very easy nowadays to just say, well, we need a former Husker, or we need a former Blue Jay, or we need a former Laker, or whatever. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about the personalities. It's about the people that connect with the audience and what their background is, whether they come from Fremont or from Omaha North or wherever, doesn't matter. It's about entertaining the folks, because that's what we are. We're entertainers. We're not really journalists. We do some journalist type things, but we're really not journalists. We're a take factory, I guess, for lack of a better term. And I'd like to think that the way our show came together is a way a lot of shows can still come together. And then it doesn't just have to have the formula of, here's the professional broadcaster, here's the ex-jock, here's the other ex-jock, let's make it work.
To go back to the idea of former players, what Damon Benning's been able to do, what Nick Baugh's been able to do, is a testament to them and their abilities, right? Totally. And so I think a lot of people see them and say, oh, that's great, let's get a former Blue Jay, let's get a former Husker. And it's like, no, those guys put in the work. Damon never sleeps. He watches sports at all hours. He coaches. He has such a great knowledge base. Nick and the work that he put in, and to bring his personality, and Damon did the same thing, bring his personality to the forefront, where he is the guy who laughs, the guy who has fun. I know that early on, Happer, I felt like the outlier on the station because John, play-by-play, had been in the business for a while. Same with Gary. And then you had, at the time, Game Time with Nick Baugh, former Blue Jay, so a former D1 athlete, Damon Benning, former Husker, another former D1 athlete. There were people who said, like, why should I listen to you? You don't have experience. You didn't play high school football. You stopped playing football when you were a kid. You didn't play high school basketball. You didn't play any of these sports at a high level. That drove me, if anything. Like, I felt like I knew the games. I still feel like I know the games, right? I'll try to find angles. And that was, John, do you remember that discussion we did year one of looking at the talent of Nebraska's team? And we were looking at two deeps of everyone on their schedule and the recruiting rankings and how the roster stacked up. And it was like, is this all for nothing? I don't know, but like, we're going to take a different angle. We're going to try to find something different. And I think that among the many things that differentiated us between the other shows, I definitely don't think I'm a trendsetter in that way, but I do, I call games now, right? Like I'm also a play-by-play announcer. I don't do it for teams, every game like John does or like Gary does, but I still have taken great pride over the years in like, I'm just the guy that kind of worked his way up and I'm still here all these years later.
Do you guys ever think about how bad Nebraska football has been since 1620 The Zone has existed?
John and I have been together. This is our 11th season on the air. We have seen 3 bowl teams as of the time of this recording. They were all in our first 3 years. We have seen 2 teams above 500. Those, again, were all in our first 3 years. And if you know your Husker history, you will remember that even those bowl years were not a whole lot of fun in terms of discourse. I would love to have one of those typical seasons where it's just every week is building on top of each other. I still love the Friday shows that has a big game feeling. We've had a lot of other stuff. We've had Nebraska basketball make multiple runs now, which is great. Creighton basketball broke through, right? They got to the Elite Eight one of those years, and John was there to tell the story. We still haven't had like a real, true, enjoyable front-to-back Nebraska football season. And I mean, sadly, it's not even like Kevin even had a whole lot of those, right? It's not like him and Michael had a whole lot of those. There was always something. I've always wondered what that would mean if we could just have a front-to-back fun ride where everyone's excited on a week in, week out basis.
Josh said something not long ago I had never really thought of, and especially in the terms that he said it, but he said, we do a pretty good wartime radio show. We're pretty decent at that. But quite honestly, I mean, my number one thing and my number one deal, I tell it to anybody, just please, whatever happens, just make sure that they're still relevant, which is maybe one of the reasons selfishly I try to remind folks on occasion that, hey, fans, you're the most important thing. You're the one thing that has kept this thing relevant for all these years, because quite frankly, there's a lot of other programs who, if they had the track record of the last 20, 25 years, there would have been some fan erosion. For sure. It's not like Nebraska football has been the worst program, but when you're kind of languishing in that realm of mediocrity, you tend just to see a gradual, slow erosion over time. We really haven't seen that. And it amazes me that we haven't seen that. And I pray that we never see that, even if the winning doesn't happen. Now, the winning obviously would be more enjoyable, and it would be fun to, kind of re-explore in this day and age how it would be like if Nebraska were in the playoff chase, in the conference chase. And hopefully at some point we'll at least get an opportunity to do that. When this show started, it was the only show. And if it weren't for all of the folks out there who keep the programs in their hearts and are so passionate about it, we wouldn't have a morning show. We wouldn't have your show, Connor. We wouldn't have a midday show. We might not have a radio station, quite frankly. So yeah, it sucks that, we don't get a chance to talk about things like, the folks in Indiana now get to talk about, or the folks at Ohio State always get to talk about. But I'm glad that there's still a healthy, very healthy passion that exists out there.
John, first of all, I guess I don't know the backstory of you first getting involved with Creighton and now seeing that thing expand over the last decade plus. I mean, in congruency with Nebraska football sort of going the other way as well, it's sort of kind of evened things out for at least people here in Omaha.
It has, but honestly, it was Creighton that got me involved with the radio station in the first place. When 1620 took over Creighton baseball in 2006, that, they wanted someone to work, Kevin wanted to work with me again, and I had the room in my schedule. So that's when I started doing Blue Jay baseball. And then when Andy Ruback came along and was the general manager, and we had the chance to be the men's basketball station, he was the one that pushed for me to do the basketball games. And I'm thankful for that. And I'm thankful for Kevin Sarver and, of course, Bruce Rasmussen for signing off on it. And it has been interesting to see the increase in and which, again, is great. Believe it or not, there are a lot of people who, either follow one school or the other. We joke a lot about the whole Jasker thing. And while there's a ton of those people out there, there are folks who are like, okay, I'm just one side or I'm just the other side. And trying to marry everybody together under the same pool and get them to listen to us for 4 hours a day has been a challenge at times, but been a lot of fun. I can always remember growing up wishing that there was a Nebraska State, because you want those rivalries, right? And we don't have that in football, but we do have it in virtually every other sport, and it's a really good rivalry. Honestly, it's the Creighton-Nebraska basketball rivalry that got me into college basketball in the first place. I love having that.
Since we're talking about 1620 The Zone and its 25th anniversary here, I mean, is there a news story that took over the show in a way where it's like you just couldn't shake it? You remember sitting there in the moment thinking, boy, this is a really big deal.
Is it a cop-out to just say Scott Frost in general? I think no one covered Scott Frost better than we did. I am so proud of how we discussed the Scott Frost era. And I would say in particular, one thing that will forever resonate with me is the attempted cancellation of the Oklahoma game. Ugh. I still remember sitting at my kitchen counter. I remember thinking, oh boy, this is going to be a topic. Mm-hmm. There have been weird controversies. Like I was the producer at the time of the Bo audio tape, but I was not on the air yet. That came out on a Monday. And at the time they did their shows at DJ's Dugout. So I hopped down the line and I said, the audio tape came out. There had been rumors of this thing for multiple years, right? And so I'm pulling the audio. I am editing out the many, many curse words in the audio. We're getting ready to play the audio. I remember going to work actually the next day. I remember asking Shane, the producer of the morning show, so what was the phone situation like today? And he was like, they were full literally the entire time. Those are the first couple of things that really come to my mind in our time together.
Honestly, some of the best ones were the funnier stories. When the whole, Manti Te'o Lene Kukua thing broke, we were on the air and we basically broke it down the whole day. That's the thing I like about doing an afternoon show versus a morning show, is there are things that can happen, over the noon hour or, when we go on the air that we can react to right there in the moment and just take off with it. I don't think this show would have been a success without Stibbs. We love Nick. Nick has been a great replacement for him, and he's brought his own element. Going back to the beginning, Stibbs was like a glue for a lot of it. At the time, he was just in there to push buttons and book guests, and that was pretty much it. I think one of the more pivotal moments in the show's history was the death of an ape in Cincinnati, which, is funny because I remember when the story first happened and Stibbs and Josh are just giggling about it and, just like, oh my God, what a weird story. And I wasn't really paying attention. And Josh came up with was it your idea to come up with the idea?
Yeah.
Of Harambe karaoke. Before this point, the personality of Stibbs really hadn't been established.
He was the Broncos fan who hates the Chiefs.
Yeah, but that's all he really was. And I just remember him working diligently on all of these different parody songs. I remember when we were going to do it, and I was like, is this really going to work? One of the things I was most happy to be wrong about was just how crazy that segment was going to be. Not so much for the bits and the songs, many of them I still hear in my head to this day, but that was the moment when Stibbs became Stibbs, the character Stibbs that everybody loved. Even people that didn't like him loved him because he added something completely different. When you got a really good stew, but it just needs a little bit something more. Stibbs was that spice. He was the salt. He just added that extra thing that was like, now it works. And this show would not have developed as it developed if that hadn't happened. And I remember telling Josh, man, I didn't know he had this kind of talent. I didn't know he had this in him. And we knew at that time, we got to get more from him. And that's when he started to create the opens, many of them we still use today.
Yeah.
And we started incorporating dumb debates, kind of spiraled out of that. And it would not have worked without Stibbs. His development as a character on the show made a massive difference. And I don't think we would be where we were without it.
I think that is the beginning of the show kind of going into that next level. That was 2016, and into the next few years, I think it really, really found itself. In a variety of ways, and we had interesting stories to cover, but us figuring ourselves out and what the show was going to look like, it happened starting with Harambe karaoke moving forward. We did Christmas karaoke one year, and Stibbs wrote a song to Wonderful Christmas Time, but it was Jack Mitchell is Triggered on Twitter.com. We don't play it as much as we should. It is so funny, and it's such like a great moment in time, too, because if you hear it today, there's all these references to random Nebraska basketball players from whatever 2018, 2019.
It's funny, the evolution of bits. One of the reasons why Neil wanted me to come over in the first place was because Kevin and I were kind of similar in that we did creative bits. The idea was, we'd just kind of carry that on. And yeah, we did some of that in the early days, but the bits have now become, like the crossover, for example, that we all get to do together, that you get to do in the morning with the guys. That's kind of become the new bits where you can just completely go off the rails and talk about, now some of my favorite moments are doing those crossovers where some topic gets us all sideways. And that's when even more of our personalities can come out and the ridiculous things can come out. We can just let it fly. And I think those things have really helped all of us bring out more personality, because again, going back to what we had talked about earlier, people are coming to us for us. It's not an arrogant thing, but that's what it is. They're coming to us because they trust us. And one of the reasons why is because they feel like they know us a little bit more. And I think, those crossovers, and Mike Thompson gets a lot of credit for this, doing those, crossover segments over the top of the hour and getting the shows to, kind of work together. I think it's an awful lot of fun. And Connor, you get to be the center pivot in all of this because you get to do both of them. And certainly the conversations that you and Nick and Gary have can get as crazy as the conversations you have with myself and Josh and Nick. It's all in an effort to, just kind of drive home the fact that, hey, here's where the personalities are. This is why you come to us.
Yeah, I love the crossovers too, mostly because a food take comes out of me and then people get to, make fun of me for that. So yeah, that's basically how those go nowadays.
And so now it becomes part of the show, right? Folks will refer back to it, if they don't like one of your takes and say, yeah, but you also, hate changing people's menu order items at the,
yeah, what do you know, Happer?
Or what do you know, Josh? You didn't eat a cheeseburger. You don't like gravy, or, John, you're an idiot because you don't like mayonnaise. It's and the people remember. And that's the other part of this is the relationship we have. Yes, we've got a lot of people who have been listeners to this radio show and radio station for a very long time, but it's some of the newer people that we have brought in who all feel like they know a piece of us. Yep. And they know how to, we used to call, before they were the friends of the program, I used to call them the jackals, because our listeners were like jackals. They would find a piece of red meat and they would just devour it, and they wouldn't let it go. And they would just tear into you because, but that was something. And that's, again, going back to the days of Kevin and Michael, that has been a constant, is the relationship we have with our audience. They know the buttons that, they can push to drive us crazy. Yeah. We know the buttons to push that, will get them to respond. I think it's very healthy, sometimes antagonistic, but most of the time it's all in good fun relationship. And sadly, that's not something that happens on a lot of medium these days.
I'll say this. It is a pleasure doing those crossovers with you guys, hanging out, getting to hang out with you, become your friend, just like weaving my way into the fabric of your guys' lives over the last couple of years. It's been a great pleasure. I appreciate you guys sitting down and doing this, talking about the old times a little bit, every day. I can't wait to do more crossovers.
Here's to more crossovers.
And the over has hit. Actually, the over hasn't hit. It hasn't happened yet.
The over has not happened, but it will indeed happen again.
It's like a Super Bowl never going to overtime until that one time.
Until it happened. People forget that I predicted that on Unsportsmanlike Conduct.
That is John Bishop and Josh Peterson, hosts of Unsportsmanlike Conduct. To hear more stories and memories from the last 25 years, head over to 1620thezone.com/25 years.